Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Who Said Photography. If you've been following us over the last couple of weeks, Lars and I discussed the old film days versus digital photography. Did a lot of things on 35 millimeter and the medium format. But we are lucky enough to know a young fella who has more old equipment than I have ever seen. None other than who else? Our good buddy Don. So Don, how are we today?
We are great. I was actually really excited to do this episode with you because, as you mentioned, I got a whole collection of old photo gear, and I love this stuff. It really brings photography back to an inventive era when you had to really know the chemistry of film and developing things. You had to understand your camera like the back of your hand because everything was manual. You had no electronic assistance of any kind. And it was a bigger challenge to take good images then, and gives me a greater respect for people that were using this equipment in the era for which it was intended.
Yeah, no, okay, but what the heck is directly behind your head?
So back there is one of the sort of the showcase pieces that I have as far as old camera gear goes, although I do intend on fully restoring it. It's about halfway there. It's a studio camera designed, as far as I can tell, in 1906. And this is from the Century Camera Company that was eventually bought by Kodak again, because they were people that broke off from Kodak and created these wonderful pieces of equipment. And it shoots on film that is 11 inches by 14 inches in size. So if you could imagine a sheet of film that is like yay big, that is what the image is created onto. In an era of photography where if you wanted an 8 by 10 print, well, you would have it photographed on an 8 by 10 negative. If you wanted an 11 by 14, an 11 by 14 negative would have been required in order to get things of that size. Enlargers didn't exist, and the film quality wasn't up to snuff to make an enlarger a practical solution. So yeah, if you wanted an 11 by 14 print, that would be the camera that it would be made on. Now in today's era, the film emulsions have gotten so much better. You can still get film. Kodak, I think, has one color film you can get in that size. Ilford makes a variety of them at that size where you can order once a year. And the point of that, well, think of it this way. Because the huge surface area of that film, if I were to shoot like a properly focused, properly exposed image and have it properly developed and then expertly scanned, I get around 2 gigapixels of resolution from an image taken with a camera well over a century old. And I think that's just remarkable. And so I'm in the process of restoring that to do exactly that and have a fun little photographic narrative about it. But it brings me back to the whole reason why I have all of this old gear is because it's still very capable, or at the very least, it forces me to think differently about photography. And every chance that you get to think differently about your art, take it, because it will get you off of the rails of whatever thoughts you happen to be stuck into and force you to be creative and inventive as part of that process.
So you're not using that to take snowflakes with?
No, that's a bit big for that subject matter. However, it does have bellows on it so that you can focus relatively close to your subject.
Well, see, that was going to be my next question. It's a prime lens, I'm presuming?
Yes, it has a 6-inch focal length.
Wow, 6-inch focal length.
I'm not sure what that equates to in millimeters. It's rated in inches from that era. So
manual aperture setting.
Yeah, so it has an aperture ring. It's got a beautiful ornate aperture on that lens. It has like 20 aperture blades. It's a thing of beauty in and of itself, just how this thing is engineered. And so you control that. There's no shutter mechanism in that camera, by the way. How you control opening and closing the shutter is you block the lens the lens, open the lens just by removing something that's covering it, and then cover it up again. Some lenses of that era did have a shutter mechanism built in, and almost every one of them have broken and are irreparable today.
Isn't that interesting? Wow. Good for you.
Yeah.
I'm even more impressed that you are refurbishing it.
Well, I built a new lens board, and I had the lens reconditioned. So that was step number one. Number two is the camera came to me with what's called a reduction back, because it can shoot on 11 by 14 film if it has the full size back. But if you wanted to use it with 4 by 5 or 8 by 10 or any other size, you would have a reduction component on it so that you could slide the film holders in. And I've got some film holders here with another camera that is sort of a unique piece in my collection. This is made in the digital era by a photographer, Chris Marquardt, and he made the Marquardt International Pinhole Camera. This is a box. This is as simple as a camera gets. It's got a hole in the front,
Yep.
and it's got nothing on the back, right? It's an empty box. There's nothing to it. But on the back side, it's intended to have a film holder. And this is a universal standard for 4-inch by 5-inch film. And so with this, I could have that running through that studio camera, because that studio camera has a reduction back on it for this size, and I need to get the original back for it. But at the end of the day, what you'll be seeing is this is a film holder. So what happens is you slide in the film, and then you close it. This is a dark slide that goes in front of it. And when you're ready to make the exposure, you pull the dark slide out. The image is made by opening and closing the lens, and then you slide that dark slide back in place, and you've got now an exposed piece of film. And these holders have one slide on each side. So that's how large format photography had worked. And for many years, that was preferred. In fact, a lot of landscape photographers, shouldn't say a lot, but at least some diehards still use large format cameras. And so I've got another one here. Yeah, if I can reach it. This is an Arca Swiss Model C 4x5 camera, and this has all sorts of really fun motions and movements to it, because unlike a regular camera in this era of photography, I could take this and I could shift my focus plane to be off on any weird angle. So I can move the camera to shift that way, or based on my adjustments here, shift sideways, left and right. And so I can take the film plane, just like a tilt shift lens on a digital camera. I can control exactly where that focal plane is going to fall. It doesn't have to be flat to the sensor. And so a tilt shift lens on a modern digital SLR is a pale comparison to the adjustments that a camera like this would have at its disposal. So, for example, if I have a field of flowers and I've got nothing above and nothing below of interest, I can shift the focus plane so that by tilting it forward, I can have the entire row of flowers in the entire field all sharp, but everything above and below the flowers out of focus. The focus plane does not have to be parallel to the sensor or the film plane. You can manipulate that in any way that you want. And the old cameras, they were really, really good at doing that. And so this Arca Swiss 4x5 camera it's a pretty expensive piece of equipment even today, because it is still incredibly versatile, and it does things that digital cameras currently cannot do.
Wow. So with all this, with those two especially, where do you get the film developed?
Well, I can develop it myself if it's black and white film,
Okay.
and it's very easy. The same as if you're developing 35 millimeter film. You can buy little development tanks, and I've got all the chemicals to do that. And black and white chemicals are very easy to get a hold of. If you're doing color film, that's a bit of a different story. The chemicals are harder to get, and it's a little bit more particular about temperatures and what have you. There is a lab here in Toronto that will do it, and most major cities will have at least 1 or 2 labs that will develop 4x5, even 8x10 film. When you get to bigger sizes than that, then you might have to be handling it yourself again, because it becomes more of a niche. But yeah, 4x5 and 8x10 film, there are labs out there in pretty much every single metropolis that will develop it for you. You just got to seek them out.
You just got to seek them out. Well, isn't that interesting? Okay, so the Arc Swiss, you caught me off on guard. I didn't know you had that one. Wow, that was like, especially the way they had to focus and the way they had to put a little bit more thought into it, and there was a cost associated with that as well. So what's it cost for you to get film? I know 35 millimeter film, print and develop, I think is about $11 for the 35. What are you paying for that large size format?
The film itself, you'll buy it in packages of between 10 and 50 sheets of film at a time. Of course, the more you buy, the cheaper it is per shot. On average, for black and white film, you might be paying $3 or $4 a frame to buy the film. And for color, probably closer to $6 or $7 a frame, depending on the emulsion that you're after at 4x5 size. So it's not cheap overall, but you know, if I'm going out and I'm shooting with that camera, I'm taking 4 pictures. You know, I'm not taking a whole lot, and I'm going to spend like a half hour setting up each shot individually. It's not going to be a run and gun kind of experience. It really slows you down, especially when you know every time you press the shutter button, it's going to cost you a significant amount of money, compared to a 35 millimeter roll where, yeah, the whole roll might cost you between $10 and $15 to develop, but you got 36 shots on that. So this is more costly, but from a 4x5 negative, you'll get between 200 and 300 megapixels of resolution. So that still blows digital out of the water if you're willing to go through the inconvenience of the big, bulky camera, and the inconvenience of developing and the inconvenience of scanning. It's not a quick and easy solution, and it's not for every type of shooting. But if you've got that beautiful landscape and you want to make the most of it, well, that kind of gear is still there. I know product photographers, artwork reproduction photographers, even portrait photographers will still be using this kind of equipment because it does excel at the end product.
I know this is true. This is true. I know a lot of guys still use Leica and Hasselblad medium format cameras, and they're still fairly expensive. So where are you finding these items? And you're probably going to say eBay.
Well, no, the large camera was owned by a guy, Jerry Robin, who I was talking to on a photo walk, and he was clearing out his basement and wanted to find a good home for it. And I paid well for it, but I know that I got it at a steal, and so that was a personal connection. The Arca Swiss was also a personal connection to get that at what I paid for it. But a lot of stuff I'll find on eBay. Or, you know, I've been a fan of some modern lenses, like newly produced lenses based on very old optical formulas. And so I've got a few of those here as well. This is the daguerreotype achromat from Lomography. And they came out with this as a Kickstarter a while ago, and I got in early on that. And it's a beautiful brass lens, brass lens cap, brass lens hood. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of equipment. It is one of the simplest optics that has existed. In fact, it's one of the very first photographic optics in its optical formula. And I've made some fun images with it, particularly because it has a little slot where I can put in my own aperture. So it's f2.9 wide open, and you can put in smaller apertures to shoot at different apertures. But I can put in apertures of different shapes. I can put in a star-shaped or a heart-shaped aperture, and all of the bokeh in the background of the image will take on that shape. And while I'm doing that with this gimmicky old lens, I can do that with a modern lens as well. There's no different. You can put a different shaped aperture in front of any lens and get that effect, but this lens had it all in one kit, and so I picked that up. And I've done some great shots. I've sold prints that I've taken with this lens, and I've been very happy with that. It says Paris 1839 was when that optical formula was originally created.
Okay, so while we're still talking about lenses, one of the other times that we talked about lenses is you were sending lenses overseas to somebody to have the film removed.
Yes, well, and I don't have that lens within reach, but that lens was an old Helios 44, where the lenses were taken out of the lens, and they were scrubbed of any optical coatings that they had on them in order to allow for flare to come into the shot. We were talking previously about infrared and how all the flare can be a component of your compositions, but if you wanted to do that in in the visible spectrum, most lenses have all of these coatings that prevent you from doing so. So I had this lens converted to be the model, they call it the flare factory. And the flare factory kind of lens will allow me to get that flare and explore that in some really interesting ways. So
okay.
Yeah, you can do that as well. The modern versions of these lenses, they've got coatings to prevent that and to play with things on a slightly different level. But I'll show you an image that was taken with that lens, which I find is really interesting as far as how I can push limits in my photography and where those limits will actually take me. And I'll lead that into another old school lens design from the early 1900s, I believe, which is this guy right here. This is the Trioplan 100. This is a newer version of it, of course, for digital cameras, and it's a very expensive new conversion. But the Trioplan optics were originally, they came about in like 1912, 1916, somewhere around that time frame, because it, wide open, will create itself a very interesting bokeh. These old lenses have optical flaws that can be used very, very creatively. Now, on that first lens that I was showing you, this beautiful brass beast here, if I were to show you this image is created with that old lens. This is using modern science and my mad scientist approach to photography using ultraviolet lights and fluorescing substances to have a freezing soap bubble that has, if you look closely in the background, all of the bokeh in the background, they're snowflakes. They are shaped like snowflakes because I put an aperture in the lens that was shaped like a snowflake. And so that comes through in all of the out of focus highlights in this particular image and adds a certain sense of magic to the end result. Now the trio plan lens, the black one that I just showed you, it has what's called a soap bubble bokeh, where the bokeh in the background has a brighter ring around it on the outside and it's darker on the inside. And it also has a somewhat magical quality to it when you can get that to work. So these old lenses, these old optical formulas, they end up producing some really interesting images as a result. And while I paid a lot for this as a modern version, you can pick up an old Trioplan lens on eBay for $100 or $200. They're not that expensive comparing to modern equipment. And you can start to experiment with all of this stuff that in the digital era, it would be very difficult to shoot an image like that. Because our lenses are designed to create the most technically perfect image possible, where the magic in these images tend to occur from flaws or deliberate manipulation of the optical system.
Yeah, okay. I'm totally stunned. So that's how you're doing it. Isn't that interesting? See, I'm glad we have these shows and I get to ask these questions. Isn't that, again, totally blowing my mind on where you are in this photography field, so light years ahead of me or behind me. I'm not sure.
There's a lot of things in photography that have not necessarily been revisited to a great degree, and one of them is cameras like this here. We've got this guy here is a Realist Custom, which is a 3D camera, and so in this case, we have these two lenses on the sides. Those are the ones that actually record the image. The one in the middle is the one that you'll actually see through. And there's a little tiny little hole in the bottom there that's where you'll look through, and that connects to that center lens. So the film will run across the back, and we'll take one image here, and then it shifts. And the space in between, that one becomes an image for the next sequence, and so on and so forth. So on a 35 millimeter roll of film, you'll get quite a few stereoscopic 3D images on a camera like this. Now, what is the usefulness of stereoscopic 3D? Well, when it was first introduced in the 1800s, that was before television and possibly before radio in some ways. It was a way for people to experience the world outside of their own life. And it really caught on. And there was a lot of 3D stereoscopes like this one here. And this one was designed, this stereoscope is from 1867, I believe. So that makes it 150 years old. And this is an image that I produced using some of my 3D lenses that I have for my camera right now. And so this was done using the whole digital workflow, but creating something that if you were to look through that with your own two eyes and see the results of that, it just pops out in some beautiful, vibrant life and depth that you cannot get with a regular photograph. And 150 years old, it's still magic today.
Okay. At 150 years old, and nowadays we're just bringing back virtual goggles.
Well, exactly. And so there is a market for this kind of content, right? You've got 3D televisions, you've got VR headsets, you've got Google Cardboard. All of this stuff allows you to absorb and kind of just dive into this kind of content. And so I've got a few lenses they were designed only about 10 years ago. But these are two digital camera lenses that have, if you can see in the center barrels, there are two lenses inside there. If I tilt it that way. Yep. So they're very, very close together in this regard. And that will create, this one here was the one that was used to create that image that I just showed you in the center of the flower. Each one of those lenses has an ever so slightly different point of view from the subject and will create a 3D image as a result. The older film camera that I showed you would be for more street level stuff, larger subjects. But they make 3D lenses on just about every scale.
See, I didn't know those even existed.
Now you do.
See, that's caught me off guard because I didn't realize. See, I didn't play with it. I've seen some of your 3D stuff. The way it was explained to me. Now we're getting off topic again, off the old equipment. We can discuss a lot of that later. Was basically to take two images and put them together, but shift your weight a little bit while you're creating that type of 3D image. So you can do
that too. You can do that too. Or you can take a focusing rail for macro photography that's normally designed to move you forward and backward through the subject for focus stacking and turn it sideways and move the camera from here over to here. And that shift in a much more controlled environment will allow you to put those two images together as a 3D pair. Absolutely. When you have a dedicated lens or a dedicated camera that has two lenses in it, that lets you capture action or things that might be more fleeting, and have each image be a perfect representation of the subject without any motion or things that would distort the 3D view.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to throw that away. We can discuss that later. Give me back this 3D camera. You're putting 35 millimeter film in this.
35 millimeter film in this.
Now,
and so each image that you take is about a half frame 35 millimeter. So it's lower resolution than a regular 35 millimeter image would be. However, your eyes do something fun when you combine them together in 3D, and the resolution overlaps from each eye, and it kind of returns that resolution to the end result.
Right, but what I'm trying to understand how it actually works. So is it taking slide film? So here's what I'm thinking. It's taking slide film. You're using slide film, and it's taking two images.
Either have used slides and used it in a backlit viewer, or you could have done them as just a regular negative, and then have that made as to print and viewed in that stereoscope viewer that I had just showed you. Either way works. And Kodak is bringing back their Ektachrome film right now, and that'll be out towards the end of the year. So yes, you will have slide film as an option for these kinds of cameras again.
Okay, because I know one of the other photographers I've talked to, they used to take slide film, pull it apart, and put 2 or 3 slides in to make fine art. So this is not what the 3D camera is doing. I'm taking two different pictures. I'm taking 2 different pictures, and I'm using the viewer or the slide mechanism. So we're going back to early 1900s, early 1800s, prior to TV.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah, well, I mean, the 3D camera that I just showed you was made in the 1950s and 60s. So it's a newer version of that same old technology. But like that giant old studio camera, you can get those with 2 lenses on them. And so stereo photography was done at that scale as well, and in that vintage.
Okay. So we've got one more I want to discuss. And
Sure.
we're out of time, but we're going to go carry on with one more. The other one you have that I'm very interested in is the Panoramic.
That's this guy right up here, sort of just out of the frame. I'm going to grab that and show you, because that camera has, it's kind of a unique quality to it. This is a Linhof Technorama. And so the Linhof Technorama would shoot on medium format film. So that's in between the 35 millimeter and the 4x5. But it would shoot on a negative that is that big, as far as that little silver square that you're seeing there. That is a ridiculously huge negative for a camera of this size. In fact, it's longer than a 4x5 negative, and it'll get about the same resolution. But you can shoot it on roll film, which is much more convenient to both shoot and develop. Hard to see, but the center is brighter than the edges. The center is darker than the edges. I might correct myself, because that corrects for vignetting in camera, where in this case, the edges of the frame would be so close to the edge of the image circle that they would get darker. So to compensate for that, you make the center of the image darker and the edges of it brighter, and it fixes the vignetting in camera.
Oh, isn't that a smart way of doing it?
Yeah. Now the filter has to be designed for a specific image circle or a frame size and a specific lens. It's a very unique kind of arrangement. It's the only time I've ever seen something like that before.
Well, to me, this one is very interesting. I'm a big panoramic guy, and this is what we've discussed a little bit about this, but we haven't really gone into detail of this one very far. So that's why I'm more interested.
Yeah. So 120 film will get you, I think, 4 or 5 frames on a single roll, and that's all you get. It does take 220 film, which is double the length, but it's kind of finicky about how that gets loaded in, so I haven't used that before. And the viewfinder here, again, it's a rangefinder. You're not seeing through the lens or anything. So the viewfinder, if you were looking through that, you actually have to look around left and right in order to see exactly the entire framing that you're going to get, and understand that the offset from that is going to be slight, that this is getting a slightly higher view than the actual lens itself, so that you adjust your framing accordingly for the top and the bottom edges.
So is the viewfinder also a panoramic?
The viewfinder is a panoramic viewfinder. might be kind of hard to see specifically here, but it does have sort of a panoramic kind of window on it. There we go. And so if I'm looking through the other side, I get to look through that, and I get the same field of view as I would on the actual camera itself.
Oh, okay. See, that I find quite interesting as well. That's, you know, we haven't really shown this. We've discussed this when you got it. We haven't really discussed it. So aperture settings and all that are all manual?
It's all manual, and so you've got all of the controls on the front of the camera, just like you would on any large format camera. You've got your shutter mechanism, you've got your aperture to control. Everything is here. This would be your focusing ring at the back, and it's all manual. It's all mechanical, and it works pretty well. It does. Older cameras will tend to start to fail when they get to the longer shutter speeds, because whatever springs inside of them have worn out a little bit. And so this one doesn't work so well at the 1 second and 2 second mark, but it does work pretty well at just about everything else. And they're hard to fix. There's no camera repair place that can really recondition this for me that's at least close by. I was thinking actually of bringing it to a watch repair company, because this is not an optical or a camera issue, it's a timing issue. And
that's all we have time for, because I'm sure we could continue on with more and more of your AKA toys.
Tools, creative professional tools.
Tools, okay, yeah, we call them toys here. Anyways, I want to thank you guys for watching. As always, Don, thanks very much. Where can people get a hold of you?
Doncom.ca is where you'll find my home on the internet. It's got links to all of my social media places where I'm constantly sharing new images and new experiments and the results of those experiments. So be sure that you find the social media links on that. And my podcast, which is InsideTheLens.com. And so you can find all of my crazy antics about discussions similar to this, about the science and the underlying nature of photography over there. And follow me anywhere that you'll see me online.
Yep, awesome. And 9 times out of 10, if you follow me on Facebook, you'll find Don. I share most of his items as well on Facebook and Google+. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time on Who Said Photography.